Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Tuesday, February 10th. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. In the aftermath of two high-profile killings in Minnesota involving U.S. immigration agents, the mayor of Fresno is calling for change.
And I don't think this is a Republican or Democrat issue. I think it's an issue about humanity. And are we going to choose to treat people with a compassion in a right way and to uphold the law?
Mayor Jerry Dyer discusses public safety and immigration reform. But first, these headlines. High-ranking city officials confirmed to our news partner Fresno Land that the Fresno Arts Council is under criminal investigation. The FBI and the Fresno Police Department are looking into possible embezzlement of over $1 million from the organization, and this allegedly involves a former employee. The president of the Arts Council issued a late-night statement on Friday confirming the investigation. In the meantime, the city of Fresno has terminated its contract with the Arts Council. A recent gathering of health experts by the California Healthcare Foundation reported gains and losses in San Joaquin Valley healthcare over the past few years. But as KVPR's Carrie Klein reports, local healthcare leaders also have dire warnings about cuts to Medicaid.
Last year, Congress cut nearly $1 trillion from the health insurance safety net program known as Medicaid. Some patients will lose their coverage, and some providers will receive less money from the government to treat Medicaid patients. Mark Mertz is CEO of Cahuilla Health in Visalia. He said he's certain hospitals will close.
We absolutely cannot absorb any additional reductions in payments for lower income patients who really do, need us the most.
Dr. Simon Paul is Madera County's health officer. He's optimistic that eventually a better healthcare system will, quote, rise from the ashes of this one.
It's so complicated that somehow this will lead to momentum enough to come up with a system that's just more workable and more efficient and lets people get the care they need.
Both agree, as cuts take effect, healthcare facilities will need to do more with less. For KVPR News, I'm Carrie Klein.
Hundreds of students in the Fresno area have taken part in mass walkouts in recent weeks. They're protesting immigration actions taking place in the U.S., but superintendents in the region are now calling for an end to those demonstrations. The officials say the mass walkouts present a hazard for students who are taking to the streets, but it's also presenting a learning challenge since it's interrupted class schedules. School officials say they support students' right to protest, but are asking parents to speak with their children about the best way to do it. New research from Stanford suggests universal child care could add $23 billion to California's economy. The study estimates that universal child care would enable more than 100,000 mothers to enter the workforce, and that would boost the state's GDP enough to cover the cost of the program. A companion study from UC Irvine and UC Berkeley found 600,000 children under the age of 3 lack access to licensed care, and that is costing the state up to $53 billion in annual economic losses. Avo Makdessian is executive director of the First Five Association of California. He says the child care market is broken.
It's because we treat childcare like a private luxury instead of a public necessity like healthcare or housing. So if you were to imagine public schools were only meant for families who could afford them, that's what we've done with childcare.
California does offer universal transitional kindergarten for 4-year-olds, but parents of younger children are left to find their own options.
Support for Central Valley Daily comes from the members of KVPR. Join at $8 or more per month and access ad-free NPR podcasts through NPR Plus. Give now at kvpr.org/donate.
And now to our main story. Mayors from some of the country's biggest cities met recently in our nation's capital for the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Among them was Fresno Mayor Jerry Dyer. This gathering was an opportunity for the mayors to discuss some of the most pressing issues right now, including immigration. President Trump's mass deportation agenda means many local leaders are having to navigate federal law enforcement officers in their own neighborhoods. And we wanted to know, what would Mayor Dyer do if large-scale ICE operations arrived in Fresno? Fresno has 500,000 people, and there are many residents without legal status who are deeply rooted in the community. So, to further discuss how he views this moment in U.S. history, Dyer came to the KVPR studios, and today we're bringing you an extended conversation, something we felt was important considering how many communities like Fresno are grappling with the same issue around the country. Mayor Dyer starts our conversation by giving a brief recap of his comments at the mayor's conference.
Well, number one, very concerning to mayors across the country about how ICE is operating within our cities, because they can't operate in a vacuum. Whatever they do is going to spill over into local government, into the communities, and involved our police departments, and it has. And so when that happens, it creates concern because what I shared at the news conference was anytime you police a community or neighborhood, you have to do it with permission from those folks. And that means you have to have sound tactics. The way you operate and interact with people has to be one that's very professional, because if you don't, you're going to lose the support and trust of your community. And when that happens, you end up having a rejection. And that's what we're seeing across the country when ICE comes into communities, is that neighborhoods, community members are rejecting ICE, and they're doing it through protest. And then those protests ultimately are escalating into violence, property damage, and unfortunately, a couple of deaths.
You also mentioned in that speech, the police can't be seen as a, quote, occupying force.
Right. Yes. So, what I've found over the years is the most important thing that we can have in government, especially police departments, is trust of the community. And when you lose that trust, you're no longer a welcomed presence. And what we're seeing is that ICE has come into communities and appears to be somewhat of an occupying force. They're not welcomed by the communities. And the manner in which they dress, the tactics they're using, the fact that they're wearing masks when they interact with people. There's a time for masks to be worn in law enforcement. SWAT officers across the country use them, but it's usually for the purpose of not disguising them as much as concealing where they're at, especially in hours of darkness. So to wear a mask when you're interacting with people really allows the ICE officers to conceal their identity. There's a sense of anonymity. And when that happens, sometimes you behave in a way that you normally wouldn't. One of the reasons why local law enforcement agencies across the nation today have body-worn cameras so that they can record the incident. And it causes people on both sides to be much more professional. And I'm glad to see now that ICE is starting to wear body cameras like local law enforcement.
You mentioned that they should use sound tactics other than not concealing their face. What other tactics would be a more traditional approach?
I would say that the thing that's concerning is whenever you're utilizing unmarked vehicles, plain vehicles, whether it's SUVs or vans, and you go into a open space like a Home Depot or a car wash or even a neighborhood, and the clothing in which you're wearing could be perhaps acquired by any citizen, and you jump out of the vehicle and you grab someone and you throw them in the vehicle and you drive away. People really don't know if that's a kidnapping from who knows who, or if it's a legitimate law enforcement agency conducting an operation, which is why at the local level we always use marked police vehicles. When we're involved in any plainclothes operation, you'll see there'll be the presence of a marked uniformed officer nearby. The other thing is that we do not see the level of de-escalation that local law enforcement officers utilize. Officers get trained in a significant amount of hours on de-escalation, and we haven't seen that. We haven't seen that yet with ICE. The other thing is I think that's of a lot of concern for communities is when perhaps ICE officers have either allowed themselves or placed themselves in a position of danger. There are times when police officers can't avoid being in a position where in front of a vehicle, but to intentionally place yourself in front of a vehicle to tell somebody stop or hold up your hand, and they attempt to drive away, that could create a situation where deadly force is used, and it was used. And so those are some of the training I think that have been most concerning. How you remove people from vehicles. There's ways to do that. How and when you utilize tear gas in crowd management situations. All of those things require an enormous amount of training.
For listeners across the valley who might not know, you're the former police chief of Fresno, so I do think you're uniquely poised to comment on what's going on.
Yeah, I spent 40 years in the Fresno Police Department, the last 18 as a police chief. And so during that time, I was trained a lot. I served as a trainer for the department at one time in a number of areas dealing with tactics. I supervised our SWAT team for a number of years. So tactics are something that are near and dear to me.
That leads me to ask, what would the city do if Fresno were the next place to be targeted by ICE or federal law enforcement? Is there a plan in place?
Well, the plan would be, and has been, quite frankly, is to communicate with the community openly about if ICE is present in our community. I know people don't want to hear this, but ICE is a law enforcement agency. They have the power to detain people. They have the power to arrest. And they even have the power to utilize deadly force if they feel that their life is threatened. And so what we want people to do, number one, is to cooperate. As hard as that is to do, we want people to be cooperative, because when they don't cooperate, that is when situations escalate. And so that's first and foremost. We also want people in the community to know that local law enforcement, the Fresno Police Department, Fresno Sheriff's Department, they're not out there seeking people who are undocumented. That's not a responsibility of local law enforcement at all across the nation. It is the responsibility of the federal agents who work for ICE or Border Patrol. So we want them to know that. And we want them to know that we're not participating or cooperating. When I say cooperate, we're not participating in federal ICE operations. We have a lot of great working relationships with federal agencies, with the FBI and DEA and some of those folks. They're great to work with. And same with ATF. But local law enforcement, primarily across the country, they're not involved, nor are we in Fresno involved in ICE operations.
What do you say to critics who say, when they hear that comment of, okay, the public should cooperate and not escalate the situation? What do you say to critics who say, hey, why is the onus on me to cooperate? Shouldn't the people in law enforcement be setting the example or following proper tactics? I
100% agree. I do believe that both folks have a role to play, law enforcement as well as the citizens. And, that's why I say I want people who are citizens to cooperate, but we also want law enforcement to utilize the right tactics. We don't want them to go into a community, be seen as an occupying force, heavily armed, go into neighborhoods, cast a net, and unfortunately you have innocent people that get brought in through that net. I think what people in America agree on is this. We want comprehensive immigration reform. That means securing the borders, and I have to give credit to this administration and to President Trump. They have done more to secure our borders, I think, than anyone in our history. And so that's a good step. People also want a legitimate way to become a U.S. citizen in our country, a pathway to citizenship in a timely way. Unfortunately, we have a system that takes 15 to 20 years. And then third, people do want immigration enforcement in communities. And what was told to the American people that we were going to start with the worst first. And that is going after those individuals that are felons, people that committed serious crimes. I think we all agree we want those people dealt with, arrested, removed from the country, whatever it is. But when you start targeting individuals or arresting people that are farm workers, people that are working at a car wash, or the like, that's when I think we start having this division in America, and that's where we're at today.
I think it's worth noting that the office of mayor is not a partisan position, but you do consider yourself a conservative, right? I
consider myself a conservative, although, people question that. I've always felt that I'm more of a moderate, but I'm a conservative, fiscal conservative, etc.
I ask that because I'm curious what it's been like for you to publicly be critical of the current administration. Again, you're on board with certain efforts, sure, but other things you've been critical, and to have that opportunity to speak out publicly, I'm just curious what that was like for you, and if you think it's an opportunity perhaps for the party to reflect an abundance of voices and not just the president's.
Yeah, sure. First and foremost, I learned when I was a police chief what it was truly to be nonpartisan. When people call for help, our dispatchers never said 911 state your party. They said 911 state your emergency.
Or your legal status for
that matter.
Or your
legal status.
Yeah.
Correct. That's exactly right. And so the fact that I have spoken out, I felt it was important. One of the things that I got into law enforcement was to protect people, and all people. And that means people that are out there that are undocumented as well. And so when I see things happening, I feel that I have to speak out. And I know I'm going to get criticism, and I have. If you read some of the comments on social media, people will say that I'm a traitor, a sellout, or whatever. I'm not really a Republican. And I don't think this is a Republican or Democrat issue. I think it's an issue about humanity. And are we going to choose to treat people with a compassion and a right way, and to uphold the law and not violate the law? And so when I see some of the things that are occurring, I have to speak out. And if I don't feel like I'm doing my job as a mayor.
On that note, I have a little bit of a philosophical question, because you were recently quoted in the Associated Press as saying, "We've never seen federal law enforcement officers just come into cities like this." You called it unprecedented. Now, Republicans typically prefer limited government, yet a lot of people are seeing this current government's efforts as government overreach, so to speak. Yeah. So I'm curious, it's kind of ironic, but how do you feel about that because of the position it puts you in as a mayor?
I believe in local control. I believe that we have created a system of government in America where we have the federal government, the state government, and local government, both city and county. And we have created the local police departments and county sheriff's departments to police neighborhoods. We train them to do that. We train them to interact with citizens. But we also have federal agencies, ICE, Homeland Security, FBI, et cetera. They have a role to play. But what I don't like to see is when those cross over, when you have federal agencies in a city doing local policing, not strategically targeting individuals that they're going to arrest and going after them in a very safe and tactical way, but having a visible presence in your community. For example, when you have protest, we have federal agents out there now that are the ones policing the protest, utilizing rubber bullets, tear gas, things that we are very, very limited in local government. In fact, if you're going to use tear gas in a public place, you're going to be having to have a deputy chief approval in Fresno. It's to that level because we know the impact that can have on communities and neighborhoods, and the fact that it can start a riot. And so I just feel like local control. And I always believe that there should be cooperation between federal and local law enforcement. And I think that's the challenge we face in California. SB 54 prevents local law enforcement from cooperating with ICE. But I will say this, even before SB 54 in Fresno, we did not participate in ICE raids. We didn't check immigration status, and for good reason. And the reason is, as I stated earlier, trust is the foundation of policing. And we need people to cooperate with us from the community. We need people to report crime, to be good witnesses. And if they think that, and that includes the undocumented community, and if they believe that they're going to be deported if they report a crime or if they come forward as a witness, then we're no longer going to be as effective as a law enforcement agency. So it is important that we maintain that trust. And we do so by saying, we're not here to check your immigration status. Therefore, we don't participate in immigration enforcement with ICE.
Various governors and mayors across the country have echoed similar sentiments. They see what's happening as interference by the federal government. The mayor in Boston even recently signed an action to prevent ICE from using city property for its work. Would Fresno ever consider something like that?
I don't think that, we would go that far. I'd have to interact with the council on that, but I don't think that's a good policy locally. I think the policies we have in place are effective in Fresno. That is, we don't go out on ICE operations. There's no interaction or sharing of information. Although I would like to see, I think part of the issue with SB 54 is it prohibits ICE from being in the jails. And that's exactly where they need to be, because that's where people have been arrested, they're waiting trial, or they've been convicted. And that's if we had ICE in the jails, and I think they're learning this in Minnesota, maybe they wouldn't have ICE in the neighborhoods.
And SB, is that the sanctuary state law that
it
prevents?
Yes, it's California's law that prohibits cooperation from local government and ICE.
Yeah, so they can't say, hey, we have someone detained that's not here legally. Hey, ICE, come pick them up.
Yes.
They're not legally allowed to do that.
And when you take that away from a sheriff's department's ability to say, hey, we have an undocumented person in our jail who's been convicted of robbery, you can come and get them. They're prohibited from doing that. To some degree, there are some exceptions.
Sure.
There are some exceptions in that under SB 54.
I want to know, lastly, a lot of police work is community relations, as you've hinted at, building trust, transparency with residents. Do you think ICE's actions are undermining the city's work to gain trust between residents and law enforcement here in Fresno?
I do believe that trust, the potential of trust being eroded in communities for law enforcement and local government can happen and is happening in other cities. I hope it's not happening in Fresno. And we haven't had the large presence of ICE here or in the valley, but it can. And the reason I say it can is because people can get confused in a community as to whether or not police are part of ICE whenever ICE calls police because they need their assistance, say they're being surrounded by community members, or there's a disturbance or a protest that's occurring and the local police come. There could be this perception that ICE and police are working together. And when that happens, we start to erode and lose trust. We saw it in L.A. You saw it when it wasn't ICE, but it was
National
the
Guard. National
Guard that came in. And then next thing you know, LAPD's having to come in order to protect the National Guard, or at least, keep people safe. And when that happens, all of a sudden people are upset with LAPD and start doing things they wouldn't normally do.
Yeah, that was certainly on my mind when we were talking about federal overreach. It's not just what's happening with ICE. Okay, lastly, you mentioned that we have not had a large ICE presence in Fresno. What have we seen? Where do things stand today for Fresno? And how are you as mayor going to shepherd Fresno through what is a tense time?
Well, it's important for me as a mayor to continually communicate with the community. We want to have calm in our city. We want to have unity in our city. I don't like people out there that are provoking or agitating. There are people out there that love to create division. There are people out there when there are protests there are some people that like to provoke and agitate. And when that happens, you end up with problems with the police. And hopefully, I am hopeful that we don't see the large presence of ICE in our community. We rely too heavily on our farm workers, our migrants who have come over to this country for decades and decades and have worked in our fields, worked in our packing sheds, have fed the world. And then for ICE to come in and deport all those individuals, and that's what they feel. It's not good. And it's not good for people to live in fear. And then as a result of that fear, be afraid to go to the doctor when they need help, medical assistance, to be afraid to have their kids go to school or for them to attend church. That's what fear causes in a community. And we can't afford that in Fresno. So I want people to live their normal life. I don't want them to live in fear. And I don't want them to walk around saying, what if? What if ICE is around the corner? You can't control that, so live your life.
Fresno Mayor Jerry Dyer, thank you so much for coming to the studios.
Thank you for having me on.
And that is today's show. Have a story idea or feedback for Central Valley Daily? We'd love to hear from you. Email podcast@kvpr.org. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden and KVPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
This is Tanya Mosley, co-host of Fresh Air. You'll see your favorite actors, directors, and comedians on late-night TV shows or YouTube. But what you get with Fresh Air is a deep dive. Spend some quality time with people like Billie Eilish, Questlove, Ariana Grande, Stephen Colbert, and so many more. We ask questions you won't hear asked anywhere else. Listen to the Fresh Air podcast from NPR and WHYY.